Let's talk about the career pivot. That moment you decide or life decides for you to change direction. Is it this big strategic choice we make, or is it something life just forces on us? We're going to dig into that today using the incredible stories from the book Position to Pivot.
Just imagine hearing those words. For clinical social worker Shabril Henderson, that sentence wasn't just corporate jargon. It was a total shockwave. It's a moment so many of us can relate to, right? That feeling of the ground just disappearing from under your feet. And that's exactly where our story starts today, right on the sharp edge of unexpected change.
So, what even is a pivot, really? The authors of Position to Pivot are super clear about this. It's not just some random change of plans, it's way more than that. It's a calculated move. And to get it, you first have to understand two key ideas.
Okay, here's the breakdown. Think of positioning as your foundation. It's your starting block. It's about building up your skills and reputation right where you are. But pivoting, that's the action. That's the intentional turn you make from that solid starting point to face a totally new direction. One is where you are, the other is what you do next.
Sometimes you don't choose the pivot chooses you. And this first big idea we're going to explore is all about those moments. The times when life gives you a hard push, often in the middle of a crisis, forcing you to find a new path, whether you felt ready for it or not.
Just listen to the incredible journey of Maxine Wright Thompson. At 48, she goes back to college to finish her degree. She pulls it off, graduates, and then boom, jumps right into a master's program. For 7 years, she's working toward this dream. And then, in her final semester, right as she's about to cross the finish line, she served divorce papers after 30 years of marriage. The timing was brutal. It could have stopped her, but instead, it forced her to turn a corner she never, ever saw coming.
And Maxine's own words just say it all, don't they? Sometimes we're pushed. Her old life was suddenly over, and she had no choice but to face a completely new reality. Her pivot wasn't some grand plan. It was a necessary reaction to trauma.
And remember Shabril from the beginning? As shocking as it was to get fired, she later admitted she had gotten too comfortable in a dysfunction. Being let go was that external push she never would have given herself. It was the thing that finally made her stop dreaming and actually leap into launching the private practice she'd always wanted. It's a classic example of a pivot born out of pure necessity.
But what about the other side of the coin? Not every big turn in our career is forced on us. Sometimes the change doesn't come from a crisis at all. It comes from this quiet internal calling, a conscious choice that tells you, hey, it's time for something new. For Erica Brooks, this one date, this was the day it all changed. There was no crisis, no one got fired. It was just a day of sudden, unexpected clarity that would completely upend the career path she had so carefully mapped out for herself. See, Erica was terrified of being a therapist. The responsibility just felt like way too much. So her plan was solid. Become a case manager, help people connect with resources, and just stick to that lane. That self-doubt was really holding her back from what she was truly meant to do.
But then, on that specific day, a client came in having a major crisis, and Erica was the only clinician there. She was terrified, but she stepped up and did her best. The very next day, her supervisor read her letter from that same client who praised how compassionate and effective she was, and then he looked at her and said 5 simple words, "You done good, Junior." And in that one moment of validation, her entire world shifted.
It was this light bulb moment. Erica realized her carefully laid out plans just weren't her true path. She had to pivot, not because she was forced to, but because she chose to. She decided to lean into a purpose that felt bigger than her own fear. This was a pivot that was pulled from deep within.
So, okay, whether you feel like you're being pushed by life or pulled by a calling, how do you actually master the turn? How do you do it successfully? Let's break down some of the practical wisdom for navigating a pivot.
Author Chanel D. Simmons gives us this powerful 4-step roadmap. First, she says, you have to embrace change. See it as natural, not something to fight. Then, you gotta let go of your comfortable crutches. Those old habits that are holding you back. This next one is huge. Preserve your joy. Find that inner peace that isn't tied to your job or your circumstances. And finally, and this is so important, seek support. You do not have to do this alone. But listen, even when you have a roadmap, that internal struggle is so real. Remember Shabril, who's now launching her own business after getting fired? This is her describing that moment. Imposter syndrome just hit her like a ton of bricks. That feeling of being totally overwhelmed, like a fraud, even with all her qualifications.
It's a massive hurdle in any pivot.
So how'd she fight back? She took some really clear, practical steps. She started by actually taking a minute to acknowledge all her hard work. She leaned on her friends, who pushed her to celebrate her launch. And this is key. She forced herself to step into the spotlight, whether she felt ready or not. She learned that celebrating every single milestone, no matter how small, is how you finally start to silence that inner critic.
All right, so we've seen the push and we've seen the pull. We've talked about the right mindset and the hurdles you're going to face. Now let's bring it all together and turn the question back to you. When you really boil it down, what these stories show us is that it doesn't really matter if your pivot starts with a pink slip or a quiet little epiphany. Both paths are powerful opportunities. The heart of a successful pivot isn't where you start. It's about your outlook. It's about turning toward the future with what Maxine Wright Thompson calls hope.
So, the last question isn't for the authors of this book, it's for you. Whether you're feeling a gentle pull or a really forceful push, your next chapter is waiting. The only question is, are you ready to turn the corner?